Welcome to Nonprofit Essentials. You are here because you are interested in starting your own nonprofit or helping others start their nonprofit. I will cover some basic essentials that you need to think about. I will continue to provide information for you as we go along, and I can continue the learning process of starting your own nonprofit. So let's get started. First, let's define what a nonprofit is. A nonprofit is described as an organization that is developed for a purpose other than making a profit. So the purpose of the nonprofit is to provide some type of service or product without making a profit. Another definition is a corporation or association that conducts business for the benefit of the general public without shareholders and without a profit motive. That does not mean individuals cannot be paid a competitive salary for working for a nonprofit. It just means that the purpose of the nonprofit is not for the corporation to make profits or the shareholders to make profits. So let's define what the nonprofit organization, how it is structured. So there's two ways to differentiate nonprofit organizations. And this is particular to the US. So my references will be US nonprofits. There's the NTEE classification of a nonprofit, which breaks the nonprofit down into 26 different groups or categories. But there's also the IRS classification, which is the classification that you're most used to. It defines the nonprofit sector based on certain codes, and those codes are related to a purpose or defined existence of the organization. Let's talk about that. We will focus on the IRS classification. That's the one most people are familiar with. So here are some examples of nonprofit types and classifications. There's charitable organizations, which is considered as a 501c3. The IRS creates a very clear definition of what a 501c3 organization is. Then there are private foundations. That comes under the code of 509A. Then you have social welfare organization. That comes under the code of a 501c4. And I've included the reference where you can get much more detailed information if you're concerned about the right classification for your nonprofit. There's agricultural organizations, that's a 501c5. You have labor organizations, 501c5 as well. And you also have trade associations or business leagues. That is classified as a 501c6. There are other classifications for veterans organizations, credit unions. You can find all of those classifications on the website that I provided on this slide. But the major classifications in starting a nonprofit based on the IRS code is either 501c3, 509A, 501c4, 501c5, or 501c6. Now, if you're considering starting your nonprofit, you may be more interested in the 501c3. It depends on the purpose and definition of your organization, a vision and a mission, but most organizations are started under the 501c3 classification. Now, what is the nonprofit sector? We hear that term a lot as compared to for-profit or public sector. A nonprofit sector is the social sector. That is providing a good or service for the benefit of others, whether it's a community, a group of individuals. It is for social purposes. Private sector, you will hear often, is for-profit entities. They are developed for profit making, whether it's owned by individual or shareholder, it's a public for profit. The goal is to make money. And then you have the public sector. That's government. Those are government agencies or agencies that are run by the federal government or city government. They're called public sector. So you have private sector, social sector, and public sector. Remember, the nonprofit entities fall under social sector. The nonprofit governance structure has to be in place. Even when you apply for your nonprofit status through the IRS, you have to have this in place. So think about this before you even fill out the paperwork. You have to have a board of directors or a board of trustees. These are the body that have oversight of the organization based on areas of expertise. You should make sure your board covers different areas of expertise so you can break it down into oversight over finance, policy, maybe different service areas. You want to make sure you can bring in a board, not just friends, relatives, people you can put name on a piece of paper or the IRS paper. To be effective, you want to make sure that your nonprofit have a board that can serve your needs and provide the oversight that you need. Remember, the board is led by a chair or president, so you can have a chair of your board of directors or a chair of your board of trustees, and there's usually a vice chair as well. The board is responsible for all the board tasks. So the president and the president or chair, they oversee all the tasks that's involved in the board. Then under the board of directors is the president and CEO or executive director of the nonprofit. So whoever the president and CEO is, they're usually hired by the board. Then you have your leadership team. Now, depending on your nonprofit, that could be COOs, the chief operating officer, CFO, chief financial officer. That can be any range of your leadership structure. They could be VPs, the VP of operations, VP of finance, VP of administration. It depends on how you want to structure that leadership team. Then under the leadership team are usually managers that oversee each section of the operations of the organization. So if you're providing service, you usually have someone that oversees that provision of services, whether to the community, whether to individual groups. You have someone managing that. They're usually considered program managers. You also want someone that handles your finances. If your organization has a lot of involvement or interaction with the government, generally you want someone who understands the policy. You also want a fundraising manager. Now, this could be in many different sectors. This could be a dual role if your organization is small with the program manager, but you want to have all those areas covered. Let's talk about what the CEO does. Now, the leadership of a nonprofit, make sure that person have the skills and capabilities to drive the mission, oversee the key leadership team, be able to ensure financial stability. They should be very good at decision making, taking insights from maybe the chief financial officer and making decisions, that they can meet fundraising goals. This may be as simple as making sure they hire the right person. Make sure that they can be accountable and have ethical standards. I cannot stress the importance of this. Board planning and engagement, they should be very aware of how to interact with the board. That they can do succession in areas of leadership. The organization basically runs on making sure all areas of leadership is covered. If you have high rate of attrition, you're going to find a lot of gaps. So the CEO or the leader of the organization, whether it's the president or executive director, make sure that there are consistency in succession planning for all areas of leadership. Develop external relationships. Nonprofits generally partner with other organizations to deliver services or to provide a particular product. The CEO should be very familiar with how to collaborate, how to build those external relationships, and how to engage others in the vision and mission of the organization. Program performance. The CEO should be aware of how you meet certain objectives and goals and should be driving that to make sure the nonprofit performs as it's stated in all of its documentation and its vision. Board support and liaison. The CEO is usually the liaison between the organization and the board. They need to know how to facilitate support from the board and how to work with the board in providing information they need to give direction. Now, how do you know if your nonprofit is accountable, effective, and performs? Those are the 3 criteria for a nonprofit. And those are the criteria that most rankings of nonprofits, they look at these 3 areas. Accountable means how responsible and answerable to stakeholders is your organization. So if I'm supposed to provide services to a community, let's say veterans, how responsible am I in providing that service, and how answerable am I to what the needs of the veteran community is? Effective, doing things the right way, the best approach to achieve the vision and mission. How effective am I in using the money that has been raised to deliver the service? How effective am I in doing the service delivery or developing the product? As people donate money to nonprofits, they want to make sure you're using the best approach to make use of their funds, or they will stop contributing to your organization and find other organizations that found more effective ways to deliver that product or service. Performance. Performance is accomplishing the results and have evidence of the impact. Performance is a key area. There are various ways and we'll go into more detail on this as I wrap up, but there's various ways in ensuring that you are performing, and we'll talk about those because they should be built into your strategy. All three of those factors should be part of your strategic goals, your strategic vision. How are you going to achieve what you said you were going to achieve? So your strategy should define what's the process to produce that good and service. What is the process you're going to take? What to say yes to and what to say no to. A lot of times nonprofits will take any money that foundations, government, any outside funding source would give, and they'll say, we'll do it, just to make sure their nonprofit is receiving funds. Your strategy should determine what are we going to say yes to and no to. No to the things that you do not have the capacity to deliver on. You do not want to be in a situation where you are spending more money to develop partnerships because you did not upfront have that capacity. Your strategy should establish your priorities. What are your priorities? You may not be able to do everything you set out to do. It may be a great vision up front of what you want to achieve, but you can only do it one step at a time. So what are your priorities? That should be established in your strategy. And your strategy should determine where you want to be and how you're going to get there. That's that strategic plan that you develop. In 1 year, we want to be able to do this. In 5 years, we want to be able to do this. That's why you will hear a lot of organizations talk about short-term strategic plans and long-term strategic plans. And I will add an additional one to that, aspirational strategic plans. That's beyond long-term. Aspirational strategic plan is what do you aspire as the legacy for your organization? Your strategic plan should have a clear statement of your mission to your goals to your action. Those should be linked, and those statements should be linked to action. This is how you will complete and achieve your goals. So your mission should drive certain goals and objectives. Those goals and objectives should be activities or actions for you to achieve what you stated was the purpose of the organization. Now, a lot of people get very nervous about strategy. They want to hire outside. They spend a lot of money on consultants to do strategy. If you have a group of leaders and you have a very active participants, you can even use external advisory members to help you if you do not have the financial capacity. But there are 3 types of strategies. It's a vision approach. That's when you start with the vision, then tactics, then action, and then resources. So basically you're saying, how do we achieve our vision? Okay, what tactics do we need to take? What actions do we need to take? And what resources do we need to take those actions? Then there's the incremental approach. Start with one decision and then expand over time as new opportunities become available. Maybe you have a very small funding source and you want to build on that source. So you start by providing service or product to a small group, and then you build on that. Then it's the analytical approach. That's when you use analytics to decide the best strategy or fit for your organization. An example of that, if we use veterans, is to look at what does the metric say is the least service that veterans are receiving that they need, or where is the population of the most underserved veterans in the US for us to focus on. That drives our strategy on what we will focus on and how we will focus on. So another way you can strategize is through the analytic approach. Now, what is the process? Your strategic plan should be a living document. So do not behold yourself to, we have to do this, we have to do this because we said in strategic plan. You may find resources are very limited in one area, and you may want to pivot in another direction. And so always look at your strategic plan as the driving force, but always be aware that you can revise the plan as needed. So the strategic planning process starts with whatever assessments you need to put in place. So you want to make sure, whether it's metrics or whether you're starting with the vision, that you're planning appropriately. Then you want to identify your strategic issues. Develop your goals, your objectives, and identify any key partnerships that you need to develop. Then write, how will you communicate your mission, vision, and what you plan to do? That's your communication plan. Develop an operational plan. How are you going to organizationally function to be able to do this? Will you be a virtual? Will you be inside a building? If so, how would you accomplish financing that building, or will you partner with another organization? Those are all the things that should be in your operational plan. Then the executive plan. The executive plan is more high level. So where you start, you want to start identifying those tactical pieces, but the executive plan is high level as executive. How are we going to drive this? And then you have your evaluative results. You want to be able to evaluate whether you're achieving these goals and evaluate how you're assessing these results. Again, it will go back to some of the matrix. So it's more of an evaluative process. Now, there are different revenue sources, and we only have a few more slides to go. And I just wanted to give you some highlights so you could think about these as you're completing your 501c3 or whatever category paperwork for your nonprofit. You can get fees from product sales or services, which we call earned revenue. And a lot of different organizations, especially nonprofits, they think that if they create a product, they can't really make a profit off that product, which the profit off the product, the sales that you have, is actually what funds the ability to continue to offer that product or service. So that earned revenue is one area of fees. And in services, it could be offering certain services to, let's say, veteran population, and actually charging a small fee for that service. That's considered earned revenue. The other funding source is individual donations. That's charitable contributions. You can ask individuals to help fund the nonprofit. You can ask others who very connected to your mission and vision to help make individual donations. There's also foundation grants. That's where you will find grant sources out there, and there's so many grants available to cover every area. So you have to identify the right grant source and you apply for grants. Corporations give grants, private organizations or private communities give grants, families give grants. So you can identify these grant sources and start applying for grants. Now, everyone thinks we need a grant writer. A lot of these grants, especially corporate grants really does not require an exhaustive grant writer. It's actually an application. You go online, you can look at whatever grant opportunities being offered by the corporation, and you can also just fill out the application. They say, what's the purpose? How will you use the money? It's a simple application. Do not think you need a grant writer. Most of what they're asking, you already have that defined in your strategic plan, in your communication plan. That's why it's important to do those first. There's a government grant that's widely available for all different type of nonprofits. And then you have federated funds like United Way. You can also apply for United Way funding. Then you have different groups that are just philanthropy groups. They offer sponsorships or they will match donations. They are part of this community that want to do well and they want to be socially responsible. So it's part of that corporate social responsibility, but also part of individuals as well who have a commitment to be socially responsible. Then there's social enterprises. They often partner with nonprofits to deliver certain goods and services. You've seen social organizations or organizations that have social enterprise functions where you buy a pair of shoes from this store and we'll donate a pair of shoes in an area, an underserved area, or into another country. A lot of them will partner with organizations to identify those areas and to deliver those goods and services. And then there's endowments. There are two types of endowments, quasi and pure endowments. Both of those are areas of funding that you should look into. All of this information is just to give you the vast amount of resources that's available to you and your nonprofit. Do not think you have to self-fund. Do not think you have to run up your credit card. That's not what you want to do in starting and funding your nonprofit. Now, I will end by talking about self-regulation. A lot of nonprofits get away from being compliant in a lot of different areas. And they do not understand the rules of nonprofits. They do not understand how they can get audited as a nonprofit and how they have to be fiscally responsible and have books in order. There are 3 self-regulation principles that you can look into to make sure you follow. The Independent Sector Principles for Good has 33 principles that nonprofits should follow. They're very good, solid principles. If you follow those principles, you can be assured your nonprofit is running effectively and it is doing the right thing for the right reasons. They're ethical principles. You want to adopt your own code of ethics. Every nonprofit should have a code of ethics, what you will and what you will not do. You will see that on a lot of nonprofit websites. They will say if there's certain unethical or activities in other countries or different cities they don't support, they will say, because of our ethics policy, we will not provide services to this area. You will see that a lot. You should develop your own ethical principles. You can go to the Council of Nonprofits and get some good ideas of what your ethical principles should look like and how to adopt a set of ethical principles that's already in existence. Accreditation. Now, if you provide health and educational services, there are a lot of entities that accredit your services to say you're following all the health protocols, you're providing the right services. In some states, it's required for certain services that you do have some type of validation you're providing this service. So you need to make sure you identify those. Then you want to look at different watchdog organizations and see what are other nonprofits getting in trouble for, so you can make sure you avoid those. And they are listed here as well. Here's some other compliance areas you want to make sure you follow, from the federal government to IRS to state laws to global nonprofits. If you're providing services outside of the United States, you need to make sure you are following these laws and regulations as well. Your nonprofit can be closed down. If you're not, you can be fined. You do not want that reputation. So, we've come to the end of this learning opportunity about nonprofits. Here's a summary of the characteristics of nonprofit. Make sure you're existing for a public good or a benefit of society. Make sure you use either NTEE or one of the IRS classifications for your nonprofit. Make sure that your organization is private, non-governmental. Your nonprofit is distributing goods and services as stated in your vision and mission. And make sure your stakeholders are not getting paid. You cannot provide payment to stakeholders of a nonprofit. They should be volunteers. That's one of the requirements. Make sure there's some self-governing of the nonprofit through your governance board. Make sure again that your volunteer board is not being paid and not being compensated. And make sure that your nonprofit aligns with nonprofit sector guidelines. So I hope you enjoyed that information and it will get you started on building your nonprofit. I will continue to provide information, as this is the learning continuum, and this is where people come and go, and where the place for you if you want to continue lifelong learning. Come grow with us. Come learn from us. I bring you this information from the learning continuum. Subscribe to the Facebook if you want to continue to get these information videos. They will continue as we are committed to lifelong learning. Thank you.